well as Major John Wilderman, both from the U.S. Army and from Fort Dix specifically. Welcome to you, Major. And Joe Dobovich, the nephew of the man who was lost during the war. And actually, Joe, as I read the notes, you were not even born when this incident happened, so you're much younger looking than 66, I might say. Tell us how this came about for your family. You must have heard the story through the years that your uncle had passed away in the war but was missing and presumed dead. How did that all happen?
That was all that we really heard. It was the memories of them growing up and of the plane crash and not being with us, obviously.
Right. So it happened in 1946 after the war was over, but there was continued surveillance by U.S. and other military forces in Europe. Did you know many of the details of where it crashed, why it crashed, what they were up to?
We knew it was on the borderline between Italy and France on Mount Blanc, but that was all that we really knew. And there was there was originally a mass grave of remains put in Arlington way back when. And now that they found the glacier was melting, they found more body parts. They actually did the DNA testing. And that's how this all came about.
So the plane actually crashed on a glacier and you were able to find more remains. I guess farmers or people who lived in that area would have found it, or is this a secluded area that's now sort of guarded because it is special filled with remains of World War II deceased?
What we understand from the history of this over when the plane crashed in November 1st, 1946, 14,000 feet above sea level into a glacier, the French government said it could be decades till this glacier goes down the mountain and remains, artifacts could be recovered. Over the decades, hikers and people who knew about this would go up in the spring, summer, retrieve what they found, bring it back to the U.S. government for processing. So they've known about it for, like we said, 66 years, and they've been recovering these remains over the time. So apparently, very early on, they had a ceremony burying all 8, not knowing if all 8 of them were part of those remains at Arlington. But
at least commemorating their effort and honoring their lives in some way in a generic sense or a general overall sense.
Correct. So most recently, 3 of the 8 have been identified, and Zoltan Dobovich was one of the 3 that were identified.
Right, so Sergeant Zoltan Dobovich was your uncle, who was the one that was serving at the time, a U.S. Army Air Corps member. It just speaks such volumes, I think, to our country and the meaningfulness of World War II and to all the war veterans that we continue to search for, process, and bury and honor men and women who've passed away in the prior wars. And of course, there are many outstanding MIA figures who are remaining from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, that we're still in search of. There is a whole team of people, right, that go out and search for these in an organized fashion. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, each person who's missing is essentially an open case, and just like any type of forensics group or any type of, they're still open and unsolved. So they'll do teams in this JPAC, the group that's in Hawaii. They'll go together and continue looking. Something I'll just add that separates this was there was also a group of citizens that were from France and Italy that, like Major Woodman said, would go up over time and hiking and find remains, report them and bring them down.
With the intention of hoping to find them, not just random hiking where they saw a little shrapnel.
Right, absolutely. And over time they would uncover the wallets and dog tags and the pilot's class ring from West Point and different pieces that they'd turn over. So it was actually 2 separate groups, one in France, one in Italy, that had no idea. And there was one person who was actually one of the original French soldiers who found the plane crash in 1947. He started blogging about it in 2008, and when it happened, these 2 groups got together, and they've become now a bigger group. So when this all started and I started conducting research, just Googling plane World War II, see what I came up with, I found a whole group of people that were very passionate about this, and were very interested to know, and pleased to know that we're finally able to bring people home.
So what a tremendous effort the internet and modern technology have played, not only in people being connected, inter-country connections from Italy to France to the U.S. by the internet, talking about it on the air, if you will, but also the DNA was very tricky. You were not the person that was the one that the DNA connected your uncle with your family, was it? It was a cousin in Georgia.
Correct.
Tell me more about that. Somebody rang the doorbell and said, guess what, we found the remains.
Well, originally my dad got the DNA request, but they were kind of skeptic that it was a scam, so they didn't do it. In the meantime, if my dad had done it back then, he would still have been alive to see his brother come home. So DNA is very important for people to follow through.
And you were tested to see if you were a DNA match to the remains?
No,
is that
I wasn't.
correct? So it was just a number of other family members who volunteered? How did that come about?
The military, the JPAC, did a genealogy, and they found the next closest ones, and it happened to be this one lady down in Georgia that we didn't know we had.
Okay.
Some good things came out of that.
Absolutely. Expanding your family in ways you didn't even realize. We're going to take a break and have much more on the story of the finding of this missing airman and the bringing home of the remains, and we'll show you the very beautiful ceremony to commemorate his life and his work when we come back. Welcome back to New Jersey Perspective. We want to show you a beautiful story that Nora Mushanek, one of our reporters from Action News, did on the return of the remains of this very special Sergeant Zoltan Silvovich from the U.S. Army, who had been MIA, and his remains were discovered in Europe, and the very beautiful burial ceremony that was given to him by the U.S. military with his family in attendance. Take a look.
I started to break down because the reality is he's home.
In a day filled with ceremony and emotion, Carlton Dobovich and his family are saying farewell to the people they never knew. It was 1946, before they were born, when 21-year-old Army Air Corps Staff Sergeant Zoltan Dobovich of Bethlehem Township was killed after his B-17 crashed into the French-Italian Alps.
Apparently when it hit, it covered a wide area, and so as the glacier started deteriorating, or melting, it exposed more and more.
After the crash, the original remains of the 8-member crew were brought back to the United States and buried in a single grave at Arlington National Cemetery. But more remains have been uncovered, and through modern science, tied conclusively to Sergeant Dobovich, whose family both mourns and celebrates his homecoming.
We knew him by name. We knew he's in Arlington with his crew. But now it's real. My uncle is home.
The sergeant's remains were positively identified using DNA from a distant cousin in Georgia. A relative the Doboviches in this area say they didn't even know existed.
In bringing my uncle back, his gift to us was family members that we didn't know we ever had.
As long as there's someone missing, and as long as there's a family member that's waiting for someone to come home, regardless of the time frame, we never leave a fallen person behind, ever.
And so, 66 years after he was killed in that crash half a world away, Sergeant Zoltan Dobovich is finally with his family, buried with full military honors at the Brigadier General William C. Doyle Veterans Cemetery in Arniestown. His nieces and nephews, who heard so many stories from their parents growing up about Uncle Zoli, say he'll be buried next to his brother. Finally, home. I'm Nora Mushanek, Channel 6 Action News.
What a beautiful story, and just a few more details that really add something special when you hear about them. This was a young man at 21 years old, one of 5 children. He had not married, so this particular sergeant didn't leave behind a wife or any small children. He did have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and they went on to marry and have children, and that's how he had nephews and cousins who were the ones that connected the dots on this story with the DNA testing. So, Joe, that's such a special thing that you, from a long time later, could make that connection and circle that for your family. This is so amazing to me that these remains were found in Europe, then brought back to Hawaii, which is where the team is based that does a lot of these case researches that you were talking about. But for a year or a couple of years, they remained in Hawaii because they had not been identified. So it took a long time to track down all these family members who have moved to other states and gone on to have their own lives and their own children. What was that feeling like for the U.S. Army to send a group of people out to actually find family members and make that case finally have an ending to it?
I think it's a much more positive experience. For example, we were on call to be casualty assistance officers a couple times a year, and we got the phone call that we needed to make to be used as casualty assistance officers, assuming that someone had just died in Afghanistan, and to find out that it was to repatriate remains from World War II was a much more positive or happy experience, if you will, for that, and to know that the military is continuing to search until they figure out every remain sitting in that lab in Hawaii, and they go out around the world all the time trying to continue to recover remains and then find family members to help identify them. Because obviously the DNA technology that we have now, we didn't have before. Right now, for example, all military members have their DNA cataloged
Sure.
before, when you first enter the military for this type of situation.
So back then, they didn't have DNA to do that, so they
Correct.
first had to identify the DNA of the bones remaining, and then identify if it's connected to any remaining living relatives. So it's probably very difficult to solve some of these cases, if you will use the word solve, because maybe family are deceased. Maybe family are not in connection with each other. Maybe they're hard to track down. I think it's an amazing effort.
Right, absolutely. I had to work with a case officer out of Fort Knox, Kentucky, who is a part of that organization that does all of this. And he explained to me that if you hit a dead end, they don't stop. They look for other dead ends. And first, as Joe mentioned, the genealogy expert, they brought in this specific person knew somebody, not that it wasn't a part of the military, but knew somebody that was good at doing that. So they were having problems getting a hold of the family here in New Jersey, and that's through, again, the genealogy. They found out, wait, there's a brother that moved to North Carolina, and then that's how they tracked them down and send a letter to them. So
So it's amazing that it just never ends. And obviously the beauty of the ceremony is so moving. And Joe, that had to be such a special moment even for someone you had never met, but you had heard the history through the years, and to know that you were part of something that was such an important part of our country's history.
And plus, he was brought home for Christmas.
Aww.
That was a nice gift to the family.
Well, it got delayed a little bit by Hurricane Sandy, is that right?
Yeah, but it was meant to be.
Aw.
It worked out really good. Worked out really well.
And it had to be a cohesive moment for your entire family, especially some of these cousins you'd never met.
And some even traveled to come see. So it worked out really nice. The efforts of the military.
Absolutely. Well, hats off to all of you, to Captain Michael Frazier, as well as Major John Wilderman, and to you, Joe. And please give your family our very best. I think that's a wonderful story that had a happy ending.
Thank you.
And we'll be